I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, and welcome to another episode in our Harry Potter month. This is our review for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, which is the 2010 movie directed once again by David Yates, based on the book of the same name, kind of the same name, by J.K. Rowling, although that wasn't split into two parts clearly. And this is the penultimate episode of our review series. We're almost at the end of the series. We're very, very close. But part 1 has a lot of good stuff in it, and we didn't want to group both parts into one, so we're going to be talking about this one today. As always, it's going to be incredibly spoiler-filled, so if you haven't seen Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, go watch it, come back to us, because we're just going to spoil the hell out of this. It's a general discussion, general informal, sit-down discussion about Harry Potter, everything surrounding the films and the books in general, you more so for the books than me, and we always start off with these things with our memories on it, and this one's very interesting. Our memories for these films have been kind of all over the place, really, considering we're big fans of the franchise itself. But George, memories surrounding Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1.
I can't really talk about the build-up to it very much, because I went with my two sisters, and I think it was the day after one of my mates' birthdays. We all went to the cinema to watch Harry Potter. It was the opening day, obviously. That's when everyone saw Deathly Hallows. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of it. Well, no, I did enjoy it, but the biggest memory I have is actually during the screening, in which I got punched by my friend because the first few scenes showed Dumbledore dying in slow motion again, and at this point it was still fresh in my mind and absolutely hilarious. And me and Emily were just pissing ourselves, and then my friend hit me because we were the only ones in the cinema doing it. Everyone's there, these haunting memories, and there's just two people taking the piss out of the Dumbledore.
And it's right at the start of the movie as well.
Yeah, it sets the tone of what's to come, which was hilarious.
Yeah.
And I've also got memories of Facebook that night. I was kindly reminded 4 days ago, or 5 days ago, that this film came out 6 years ago, and my Facebook status said, R.I.P. Dobby the House Elf, R.I.P., followed by a barrage of verbal abuse for spoiling the film, and I so smugly typed, read the books then.
That was kind of my attitude towards the Game of Thrones books as well. I've read the books, people should know this shit already. For me, this was actually kind of nice memories surrounding this one. So before this, I talked about this in my Half-Blood Prince review, saying that I dropped off Harry Potter at this point quite considerably. I was a massive fan for the first couple. It kind of really got towards Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix, and I more or less completely dropped off it. Didn't see Half-Blood Prince in the cinema. And when it got round to Deathly Hallows Part 1, everyone at my sixth form was talking about it and saying, oh, you're going to see the new Harry Potter. Harry Potter's back. It's the last one, kind of, although it's only Part 1 of it. There was you've got to go and see it. It's the end of an era. This was your childhood. This is what you grew up with, and it's all rounding off. And hearing everyone in my sixth form talk about it all together and just all the fond memories, it sort of rekindled that spark back in me. So I asked one of my friends if I could borrow Half-Blood Prince on DVD to give it a watch before I went to see Deathly Hallows Part 1. He did. I watched that. Only watched it the once, went straight into Deathly Hallows Part 1. And I remember the cinema experience on this one again. I haven't had that since I saw the first two. And I remember just the tension in the people before it started and the hype. You could feel the hype with everyone, because I went to see it opening day as well. And I loved it. And Deathly Hallows Part 1 is one of my favourite Harry Potter movies. I think we're going to rank them in the next episode once we've reviewed them all. This is way, way up there. And what's interesting is, I think this is on a lot of people's least favourite, who I usually talk to. They say it's the walking movie, it's the camping movie, it's the movie where not much happens, really. And we'll talk about the whole two-film split thing in a minute, but I really didn't have a problem with that. To me, this is the most character-driven one, probably out of all of them.
Yeah, it's one of those where when I first saw it, obviously, instant classic quote, I read the books. I knew that it had to be split into two. We'll talk about that later, but I knew that Part 1 wouldn't suffer as such, but it wouldn't be action-orientated, which I've got no issue with, because even at the age of, I think I was 14, I was 14 when this one came out. I wasn't stupid enough to think that every film's got to have action, and especially for a Harry Potter film, it made sense what they were doing. They had to find the Horcruxes, and there's still some good action moments, not necessarily action, but sort of big moments like the Ministry. We'll cover that soon. But it felt right. It didn't feel rushed, because if you do ramp it all into one, then it's going to feel rushed. But I think you had to have not necessarily a setup film, but the story required can't have everything shoved into one. And no. I've got no issue with the pacing. And as I got older and appreciate film more, I enjoyed part one a lot more than I did. I never disliked it. I still liked it more than a few of them. But I've got very different opinions of it 5-6 years later than I did then. And I still really enjoy it. It's just a very different film. It's more adult. It's probably the most adult film of the series.
Now, I mean, I haven't read the book to this one, and I know there's still a lot of stuff that's in the book that they did cut out, even regardless of the fact they split this into 2 movies. But for the first time, we look at the Harry Potter films that have come before, and we've always said, like, oh, if only it had like 10 minutes extra or 15 minutes extra to cover these extra things, we think it would have been a much more well-rounded movie. I really don't have that problem with this one, with maybe the exception of the Dursley scenes that are cut out towards the start, but we'll get onto that when we sort of go through the film. Other than that, I think the pace of it really works for the movie, and it does a good job of building that tension, because this is definitely a far cry from the tone of the first 2 Harry Potter movies when we get to this one. And it's been a series where it's steadily ramped up to this darker theme, but this one, when I watched it again a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't remember how dark it was, and it doesn't bring the film down as much. There's not really much humour in that, but I think that if they did go overboard with the humour in this one, it would really detract from the tone of the film, because it is almost like a war film in many respects. We get scenes later on with like the whole camping thing where Ron's listening to the radio and listening to all the families that have been killed, and it's very much like people would have been in wartime listening to, you know, the deaths of soldiers to see if their loved ones or, you know, family members had been killed.
Yeah, and I think with the comparisons of war, the obvious go-to is Nazi Germany, because the whole Voldemort Hitler comparisons, taken over a government. He wants his Aryan race of purebloods. He's anti-mudblood, i.e. anti-Jew, stuff like that. There's so many comparisons. And it's, again, going into David Yates briefly, he's got a history of doing sort of TV and politics before he took on the Harry Potter films. And you can clearly see from his debut in the Order of the Phoenix to this one that the politics-driven sort of direction that he does is really strong. And the thing is, they're not kids' films at this point, but there's still that demographic of young adult, and the themes they're conveying are so adult, and they're just not patronising in the way they do it. It's so well done, and I think that's a credit to the sort of writing of the films, the books, all of it, because sometimes you wouldn't think it is a sort of younger adult film, but it is. And
I would say out of all the films, at least in terms of going from one film to the other, this was the one where our main 3, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint and Emma Watson, really shine as actors. Like, their chemistry together in this film is great, and just their overall acting quality in this film. And I don't know if it's because they are given these more mature themes they have to act with, the sort of more meat to their acting role they get to work with, but definitely Rupert Grint, who's always been the standout for me out of all 3 of them since the first movie. He gets some really great character stuff in this movie, and it's nice to see them interact, because this movie, unlike all the other ones, well, sort of like tying into part 2 with this one as well, it takes the characters to places, to emotional extremes we haven't seen before, and it shows that tension between the two. There'd been a few bits of tension in the series before. I think it's in Goblet of Fire between Ron and Harry, but it's only really short lasting. It's really petty. In this one, you can kind of see where both sides are coming from. Like, Ron has a go at Harry for saying, like, you know, Dumbledore sent you on this merry quest and he hasn't really given you any information, people are dying, we're wasting time. Like, he wants to step up, he wants to get something done. But you also see it from Harry's perspective as well. Like, he has been given this quest and he doesn't have any information, and you feel bad for him because you want to see him accomplish it, but, you know, he's got nothing to go on. And then Hermione's in the middle trying to calm the two down, and also come up with a plan and to think on her feet. So it's really, really a great combination between the 3, and I love the way they play off each other in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the strengths, because 90% of this film is Harry, Ron and Hermione. I think if you kind of take that away, not just the fact it's Harry Potter, but they're all adults at this point, and you just look at what they've done from being the 11-year-olds taken out of Troll to now on their own, sort of in the wilderness, trying to take down this crazy Dark Lord. And that even stems back to the sort of, not the history of it, but Hermione's had to obliviate her parents, Ron's had to completely abandon his family in order for them to do it, and there's so much stuff at risk when they're doing this sort of quest, I think I can call it. And it is interesting seeing that darker side of them, especially Ron in this one.
Oh, definitely. And before I talk about that Obliviate scene you just mentioned, I just want to go quickly back to the whole two-parter thing and David Yates' director. Now, I don't want to say it was this movie because I'm not sure if there's been an adaptation before, discounting like TV miniseries and things like that. In terms of a big major film like this, I want to say this was one of the first films that did the whole splitting into two parts or splitting into multiple parts to complete their final story. And then since then, there have been so many films that have come out that have tried to piggyback off this and just copycat it. And it just doesn't work. I think there was enough material in this book. And again, I haven't read the book, but judging by how the films are, I can't physically imagine this as one movie, just for how much character stuff they had to go into. This one makes sense to have it split into two. And again, a lot of people may say this one's really slow. It is a slower pace, but I think it works to the credit of the movie. And then that makes the last one even more powerful. Like, it's not the last one, we'll get onto that one in our next review, but it's not even like a full action movie. Like, the action is in the film, but there's still a lot of other material in that film to make it feel like a film on its own. And then you look at other films that have come out since then, like Mockingjay Part 1 and Part 2, where you can really see where they've padded that movie out. The first one is so slow. There are scenes that go by where nothing happens, and you could have easily merged that into one. The Hobbit films were split into 3 movies when they could have been very easily done in 1, or probably more sensible in 2 movies. And then wasn't there
Twilight,
and it was either Maze Runner or that Divergent series.
Divergent tried to do it, and they've ended up turning it into a TV movie now because of either how crap it is, or just not made any of the money they wanted it to.
Yeah, and I hate that trope now. So that's kind of like the blessing and the curse of this movie, that it works really well in this movie, but it also spawned all these other adaptations that feel they need to finish their series with 2 movies to get 2 times the money, rather than just having a more cohesive story in 1 movie. Yeah,
and it's annoying because if you look at Harry Potter, you can track back to the Goblet of the Fire, which is they first discussed doing a 2-parter. They said no. And you know that a 2-parter was a discussion, obviously, from 4, 5, 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And you have to in 7, because if you do look at the stuff, the bits they cut out from the books, there's arguably only 2 things which are still vital. One of which is Harry falling out with Lupin, which could have been in the film, which would have given a lot to it, especially given that he's trying to run away from his family after having a newborn son. Some character moments like that. And the second thing they get rid of is the portrait of Sirius Black's granddad, who's a Hogwarts headmaster, which made sense to get rid of. And that's it, really. That's me bambling on. Everything else they have in the entire film / book is necessary to the story, because if you take out one chapter, you're sort of taking out a piece of the puzzle, and it's not going to be right when it's fully finished. And I'm happy they did do it, because David Heyman didn't want to do it, but even he says the first time, we kind of have to.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that is the trend now, because Harry Potter made sense. Hunger Games, I read them books. The 3rd book was the worst book, the 3rd book was the smallest book, and 3 and 4 are the 2 crap films. Twilight, I haven't seen part 1 and 2. My sister was a massive Twihard. She despises it because they supposedly added in a 30-minute climax action piece that took place inside a character's head, which wasn't even in the Twilight books.
Yeah.
So there's your examples just dying down the drain, and it is completely pointless. And it did make sense for this. Do it if you need it. Hobbit would have been a great 2-part. We spoke about this before we started recording. Hobbit would have been a really good 2-part film. 3 was an absolute joke.
Yeah, and in the case of the Hobbit film, and I don't want to make this a Hobbit review, but the last movie was just a massive action scene, and that's all the film was, whereas in part 2 in this, there's a lot of character stuff, there's a lot of other scenes that flesh out the film alongside the action. One thing I wanted to bring up as well before we get into sort of go through this movie is David Yates' direction. You mentioned he was a TV director. Now, this isn't a slight against the movie, because I would say his direction style in this is vastly different to what he's done before, or even what he does in part 2. This feels there's a lot of shaky cam in this film, for example, like it's on the ground with them, it's on location. And in some scenes like that where the camping, it almost does feel like a Harry Potter TV show. And I don't want that to be like a backhand against this film in terms of its quality of how it's filmed, but it is the most uniquely directed film in terms of how it's shot, I would say, out of all 8 of them.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it, because it's the first one that's not set at Hogwarts, it's a different side to the sort of, not the Harry Potter universe, because that's more Fantastic Beasts, but just in the sense that they're not on their original location. And I think what I like with the sort of camera stuff, it makes it feel claustrophobic. Not makes you feel that you're there with them, but it certainly adds that dynamic of they're just there alone in a tight tent for months and months on edge. And I feel that that's really well handled, especially when you get to the forest scenes, because I don't find them boring myself. I know some people do, but in the situation it would be very boring for these people, and that is where the sort of inner conflict between the three come from.
Yeah, I actually would say that my favourite parts in the film are to do with the camping, especially one scene which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But no, I love all that stuff, and sort of how he does, like, the camera movements and everything like that. Although the shaky cam's quite prevalent in it, especially in the scene where the Snatchers, where they're chasing after them, that gets really a lot of shaky cam. But for the first time, like, I'm talking about shaky cam, it works for the film. It feels like you're on the ground with them. It puts you in those situations a lot more. And I think that's one of the intentions of shaky cam anyway, and I think it achieves that in this. You still do get the very bombastic, epic, sweeping shots towards the start with the 7 Harry Potter chase, with Hagrid on the flying motorbike. You get your classic Harry Potter moments like that, but you talked about that, like, Hogwarts isn't in this, and you only really get one very, very brief scene of Neville and some of the fellow students of Harry Potter. I think that's what casual fans who don't really know the book and we're expecting like another trip to Hogwarts, that's why they might not like this movie, because a lot of the familiar elements have been taken out in this movie. They do come back in part 2, and that's why when I look at this movie you have to see it as what it is, a part 1 in a 2-part story, although it's one story itself. But I'm wondering if that's what turned a lot of people off this movie. And I don't even know if this is necessarily poorly reviewed. It's sitting on a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, but from the people that I have talked to who say it is the slow one, not much happens in it. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings argument, which I always get really angry about when people say it's just a whole load of walking and nothing much else. I think this might be sort of like the Lord of the Rings equivalent of the Harry Potter franchise.
I wouldn't go into the Lord of the Rings review, but if you add up all the minutes of them walking around, it's certainly a few hours less. But I know what you mean. But it's just one of them. I think most people that don't like this film probably didn't read the book. That's not a nasty remark by any chance. But I think it's the sense that when you read that book for the first time, you get a load of Hogwarts, whereas you can't in the part 1 of the film. So it is that familiarity. And I just wonder, I mean, you kind of said that I never thought that ever in my life, that there will be people that would have gone to this film and expected it to be set in Hogwarts. Yeah. Now you kind of mention that, my brain's kind of trying to process that, because I've never thought of it like that, and now there clearly would be people that did expect this film to be in Hogwarts. So I can understand some of it, but I prefer what they did in the film. It kind of made it feel a bit more open. Not everything has to be in Hogwarts. That's why they do stuff like Hogsmeade, all these other Ministry of Magic stuff. It's nice to take the story away from there, because it would just be too much if there were 7 films set there the whole time. So
complete Harry Potter Deathly Hallows book noob like myself, is it structured in a way where J.K. Rowling intersperses some scenes of Hogwarts in between all this stuff, or is it pretty much how the movies are, where you focus on Harry, Ron and Hermione camping and doing all these things and then lead up to Hogwarts like the movies do?
You get a scene with the Marauders map of Harry perving on Ginny.
Yeah.
You get like I said earlier, the headmaster on the portrait, Nicholas Black. So he gives a brief insight to Snape as headmaster. So there's this moment where they found out Ginny tried to steal the sword of Gryffindor because it was meant to be Harry's in the will. They all shut themselves and they found out she got punished. Turns out that punishment was just going to the Forbidden Forest of Hagrid. So the seeds are there of Snape being a good guy. And essentially, no, we don't actually go to Hogwarts until the characters do. And that's a credit, because it would have been too easy to have gone over. You get the odd newspaper headline where they find out that Snape's been made sort of headmaster, and you get all the sort of politics of them slowly taking over the Ministry of Magic. But the time you see Hogwarts in the film through the passageway is the first time you do in the book too. And just in case people want to know, it's a 600-page book. I think it's like 607. 380 pages of part 1, 220 of part 2, which says a lot about the action, because the Battle of Hogwarts is one chapter, and that would have been very bizarre to have seen that as one scene.
Well, that's why I'm looking forward to getting to that book eventually. I'm a very slow reader, but when I get to it, I'm looking forward to seeing how it was written. Now I have seen the film. I'm guessing it was amazing to read the book before seeing the film, which I'm guessing you probably did. So, right, let's get into the film then. Let's start going into it. So we'll talk about the opening scene. Introduced to a new character with, oh God, what's his name? Davy Jones, Bill Nighy as Rufus Scrimgeour.
Scrimgeour.
Yeah, however you pronounce it with his weird name. I can't unsee Davy Jones in this scene. I really can't. I was speaking to you before we hit record, but you can really see his mannerisms of the Davy Jones character. And he's not a pointless character because he does give the personal effects of Dumbledore to Harry, Ron and Hermione based on Dumbledore's will. And he is the new Minister of Magic, but he shows up for a couple of scenes and then we're told that he died off camera.
Yeah, I think this is a weird one because I completely forgot this when I was rereading them recently. I love Davy Jones, so it's really hard to see the opening scene. He's got the accent, he's got the extreme close-up of the eyes, where you're just expecting it to be green and tentacly, and it just echoes the sort of opening scene of the sixth film where the sort of cameras are all taking pictures of Harry and Dumbledore. I love that little connection. I don't think it's too intentional, but it's a really good setting for what's going to come from this film because these are dark times. Yeah, and what differs is the speech is lifted from the Half-Blood Prince because he's made the Minister of Magic at the start of the sixth book. Obviously, Fudge gets sacked straight after the whole Voldemort's actually alive after 1 year of trashing people. Mm-hmm. It made sense to cut him from the sixth film, and there is a pivotal scene, which I'm assuming why they did include him, which is the giving the stuff in the will. He's very different. I feel there's scenes cut from him because he's got a lot of history of Harry in the books. They didn't need to explore it, but it certainly gave a sort of opinion of the Ministry of Magic at that time, and he kind of has a noble death. In which he refuses to tell the Death Eaters whereabouts Harry is at the wedding. Although they do find out eventually it's not from Scrimgeour, but I suppose it's one of those where it was just necessary for that one scene with Dumbledore's items. Yeah,
it's getting the movie narrative as concise as you possibly can and cutting out all the blow. It does feel a bit weird how he's introduced and then we're just told that he's died in a very quick comment. I can't remember who mentions it in the film, but it did strike me as a little bit weird, and I guessed in the book he would have a lot more to do. Now, I don't want to sort of go through the entire film and pin out every single narrative element. Want to kind of keep it a brief overview, but the scene that follows this is one of the most beautifully edited and just orchestrated scenes in all 8 movies, I would say. So we have a new composer with this movie, and we'll talk much more about the music towards the end of the review with Alexander Desplat. However we pronounce his name, with the track Obliviate. Now, I think this is a difference from the book because I don't think that Hermione actually obliviates her own parents, in that she wipes their minds. And actually, a neat bit of trivia, the one who plays her mum in this movie is Caitlin Stark from Game of Thrones, if there's any Game of Thrones fans listening. I'm torn on how I feel about this scene because it does strike me as a kind of pointless thing that she does. In that I guess they know about the wizarding world, don't they, even if they're muggles? But it's kind of a heartbreaking moment, especially when you see all the old family pictures they've got of each other and her pictures disappearing from them all. It is a hard hit. It's a good opening scene because it sets the tone for the sacrifices these characters are having to make in order to get done what they need to in overthrowing Voldemort and defeating him. But I don't know, as a book fan, does that rub you up the wrong way if it treads on some of the lore that follows these books?
I love it because in the book, oh god, I said it again.
Keep count, everyone.
She doesn't do it at the start. What happens? I think there's an argument in the tent later on where she kind of drops that I had to obliviate my parents. They've now moved to Australia, and there's no history of me at all for anyone to find. If we make it out alive, then maybe I can restore my memory to them.
Oh, okay.
So it's far more heartbreaking, and I think what the key there is that it's temporary obliviating. Obviously, Gilderoy, before the comparison was made, he went out with an absolute bang, literally smacked his head on the rock, got obliviated to St. Mungo's. But the obliviate spell can work for momentary reasons, and it can be sort of anti-done, if that's a word. Obviously, we might get that. Actually, no, because that would have been a fantastic beast spoiler.
No, I was just going to say, I was going to mention, we won't go into it, but we'll just say that is an element that is prevalent in the new Fantastic Beasts movie. Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well.
But it's a really good opening scene because it does tell you what's to come. Then obviously you've got the dynamic of Ron with his family where he's standing outside. But I think it's a really good opening scene, and I absolutely love the opening song to this film.
Oh yeah, me too. And one of the tragedies of this opening montage, though, is that they unfortunately had to cut a lot of the Dursley scenes out. Now, they haven't been in every movie. I believe we said they're not in Half-Blood and they're not in Goblet of Fire. I think they're the only two movies they're not in. And they are in very, very briefly in this, where we see them leaving. They're packing up house, they're moving. Maybe they're going back to that little wooden shack in the middle of the sea. Who knows? But there were two key scenes in this that were cut out. And I know a lot of book fans love them. And I know the scenes. It's ultimately the redemption of Dudley. I'm not sure if it's the redemption of Vernon and Petunia as well. There's one scene it's more or less or completely finished in the movie, and the deleted scene section on the bonus disc. The audio's not great, but Fiona Shaw, who plays Petunia, she gets a really, really nice heartfelt scene where, you know, they've cleared all the furniture out the house. It's just her standing in the middle of the living room, and she says, like, I've been in this house for so many years, and on that night where Lily died, you didn't just lose a mother, I lost a sister. And she plays that absolutely beautifully. Like, she doesn't break down in tears, but you can see that the emotions really hit her and what's about to happen. And although she doesn't like say sorry to Harry for like what an absolute bitch she was in the other movies, there's that understanding between them, and it's a nice little emotional reconciliation between the two, and I really wish they'd have left that in. And then there's a more comedic one with Dudley where, again, his whole persona since Order of the Phoenix is really different in the original Dudley we're used to. But he says to Harry, like, I don't think you're a waste of space. And I think he shakes his hand and then he walks off, and it's that moment between the two. And Harry kind of forgives him. He just sees him as, like, you know, a big softy, like a big dumb oaf. If these scenes had been in the movie, I think it would have really fleshed out the Dursley, but on the flip side, it would have just completely destroyed the flow of that beautiful montage we get at the start of the movie. So I'm very torn on it. I think if I was going to pick one scene, I'd have kept the Petunia one in, but if it was cut out to increase the flow of that montage and make it more flowing and not just have like a huge scene plonked in the middle of it, I can kind of understand the reasoning for it.
Yeah, and you've kind of got the nail on the head there. It's some very powerful scenes, but do you break up that montage? And especially in the deleted scene, I think with today's sort of maturity of half the kids, Harry saying goodbye Big D, that might have been something else entirely.
Oh god, I never even thought of that.
No, nor did I until I saw the YouTube comments on the deleted scenes. But the Petunia one's interesting because in the
Here
books,
we go. Yeah.
When she's standing there with Harry, and I think it's phrased like she opens her mouth to speak something but chooses to walk away, and I like that they elaborate on it because it is a very powerful moment, and it's the sort of heartfelt moment with Petunia that okay, she isn't just some swami woman, she did have a sister, and I think they should have been kept in, especially the Dudley stuff, because he's completely 180'd since obviously Harry saved him from the Dementors. But I think they could have broke that montage. Or they could have even edited the montage and have it finish on that scene.
Yeah, the thing is as well, with the tone that's established in that montage, and I know we're talking a lot about this, but it is a great opening scene. With the tone that's set in that, if then we get the moment where Harry says, see you later, Big D, it is a more comedic moment, and I think that would have sort of ruined everything that had been set up before in that moment. And I think it would have left a confusing tone for the rest of the film. When it starts off in the actual theatrical cut, where it's just, you know, it's Hermione has to do this, they're all looking just mortified and unsure of what they need to. If then you end it with a joke, and then I think the scene straight after this is the Voldemort one, that would have been like a really weird tonal thing. So whilst I'm against the idea they cut out a scene where Dudley does get some redemption, I don't like the execution of that particular scene in the deleted scenes, and the effects aren't finished in it. There's a lot of green screen up in the street where they filmed it. I think if they'd have reworked it and made it a little bit more somber like the Petunia one, maybe, then it could have worked. I just don't like the execution of how they handle that particular scene.
Yeah, there's something that doesn't really work, but I still think it's something that could have gone into it though.
Yeah, I think it's like there's a lot of awkward pauses in there, and it really does drag the whole scene out. And like when he awkwardly walks backwards and almost trips over the trailer. Like, it's funny, but it does go on for a little bit long. But we'll move on to the next scene. So we need to talk about Voldemort in this one, and I think this, apart from the very last cliffhanger shot, I think this is the last time we see him in the movie. And this is one of my favourite Voldemort scenes. We talked about Ralph Fiennes at nauseum and just how over the top and hammy he is, and how much fun it looks like he's having playing the character, and how I was never really intimidated by him. In this scene, I kind of was. Like, he still gets some funny moments, like where, I guess you want to talk about this, where he approaches Lucius Malfoy and just full on snaps his wand, the one that you own. But before that, where they've got the teacher, the Muggle Studies teacher, and I can't remember her name, Charity Burbage.
Yep.
That was some really tense stuff. And we know that Voldemort's killed people before, but the fact that, she's clearly been tortured and she's just there levitating in the air, just waiting for him just for the right moment when he wants to kill her. It's really, really tense. And I love that scene. It completely just cements Voldemort as the villain for these movies.
And before we get to that, I absolutely love the music again in Snape to Malfoy Manor, which is the unofficial Death Eater theme, which we got a bit too late. But it's just this brilliant sort of establishing that, again, people that don't know the ending will have thought at this point that Snape's a really bad guy. And then the whole scene, him playing off Burbage, that he just sees her and he kind of halts for a minute because obviously he does like her. He's the good guy, and that's a co-worker he's known for so many years, just levitating above him, about to die. You've got Draco, who won't look up. It's his teacher at this point still. And it's this really nasty scene, and it is Voldemort at one of his darkest moments, and he's so calm about it. She just hovers while he's discovering or creating his plans, stuff like that. It's a really tense moment, and then you get the ending where he just outright feeds her to Nagini in front of everyone. It's absolute savage.
Yeah, and the thing that makes it heartbreaking is that she does actually get a bit of dialogue, and when she turns to Snape, she says, "We were friends." Like, you don't just get the sense that, oh yeah, they worked together at Hogwarts. Like, when she says, "We were friends," it makes it a little bit more personal. Like, they actually did talk to each other and got on. And I mean, Snape's not exactly the easiest person to get on with. Like, he's had a lot of depression in his life. He's had a lot of shit he's had to deal with. The fact that he's got friends at Hogwarts and, like, this really nice teacher, this really nice woman, and then she gets to that end, and it's really, really horrible. And that's sort of going back to what you talked about with the whole, like, Nazi regime comparisons you can draw to it. That's where it really comes to the forefront in this one, where he's like, she would, in our way, have us mate with them, or something like that. She would, in her way, have us mate with them. And if you want, like, the most on-the-nose reference to, like, Nazi Germany, I think it's pretty much in that line right there.
Yeah, and then you've got all of his loyal supporters just laughing, Bellatrix making, like, noises, and it's quite brutal because the comparisons are there. It's genuinely horrific, but it's funny because it's Voldemort. That sounds so bad.
No, it is.
As it goes on, it's just that one brilliant moment where he just says, "Who will give me their wand?" and everyone just shits themselves. I mean, your wand is essentially your life. It's the sort of the lightsaber lesson that Anakin was taught. Yeah. Not one of them. They all just back off. They all look away. They're all silent. And then he chooses Lucius, and it's just this brilliant line where he's really confused, upset, but is trying to be loyal. Where he's like, "My lord."
Yeah, it's how he delivers that line. It sounds like he's a pigeon or something. It sounds like he coos the line. He's like, "My lord." Like, he's really, really quiet how he does it. It's hilarious.
Not to say that Jason Isaacs unfortunately has a stubble because Lucius has lost his ways. He's been in Azkaban for a year and a bit. He's had a very tough time, and things aren't the same anymore. But he came back as he should have done.
I think there were talks that he didn't want to come back for this one, wasn't there? I think he said on one of the trivia things.
When he found out that he was put in Azkaban, he kind of said he thought his contract expired because at that point the obviously the last book hadn't come out. So he went to J.K. Rowling. He's like, "I've really get me out of Azkaban. I really, really want to be in the last film." Which is there like, "You're already out. You're in the first chapter."
Oh, brilliant. And it's great that he came back because we love Lucius so much. And granted, he's not as hilarious as he was back in the days of, like, Chamber of Secrets, for example, but it's just good. And it makes sense that he's in the last two because you kind of want everyone that's still alive in these movies to be there for the last few. And it's a great bit of, like, character development for him. And I guess we'll talk more about this when we get to Deathly Hallows Part 2, but you talked about the whole stubble thing. There is an actual physical degradation of the character as the film's gone, as well as like personality wise.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Lucius. If you kind of look at the whole adult concepts, I've said this before, he is the only adult to sort of not change character but develop as a character as it goes on. All the kids do, but if you look at every adult, the way they start is the way they finish, except for Lucius Malfoy. And I think that's a testament to the performance more so than the books. It's a brilliant sort of, not redemption, but what happens. He goes from the loyal smug servant to the I'm gonna get the fuck out of here in part 2. I love what they do with him, and I wish we could have more.
Yeah, me too, and we'll talk much more about him in the next review. So we move on through the film. So the 7 Harry Potters chase. This is where we get a little bit of comedy in this scene, I would say, with the whole Polyjuice thing. Mad-Eye coming back, and doesn't he quote... Actually, I might be thinking of Order of the Phoenix, where he says, "Rescuing you, of course." Isn't that in this one, or is it...
So it's from Fred and George from Chamber of Secrets in the car.
Yeah. And
No, sorry, that's me wrong. Sorry, it is Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, is it? Okay, cut that out then, never mind. But no, with like Mad-Eye coming back and the whole ministry, and not the ministry, sorry, where Mad-Eye comes back and the whole order and everything like that. And granted, we don't get many scenes with them, and that's probably one of the negatives I'd have against this movie, and indeed the next one, is that they kind of neglect a lot of their side characters. I understand why the focus needs to be on the main 3 and the main story at hand, but when you have brought in these characters that are liked by so many fans, it is a bit of a shame when they do kind of get sidelined, because I think that if they'd have been played up a bit more, I think when we get to their ultimate fates in the next one, it would have really ramped up the emotion in that, if we'd have seen them a lot more. That being said, we get introduced to a new character, Mundungus Fletcher. It's one of those instances again where it's kind of like, oh, we've always known this guy, but this is the first time we've seen him in the movie. But I like the actor they got from him. He's kind of like a cockney, wheeler dealer, swindler. He'll break into people's houses, ransack them, and then flog all the stuff on the black market. Is just a despicable character, but he's played really, really well. I don't know why Mad-Eye would trust him, though, like in this task of great import. Like he says, we need you to do this really important thing, and he knows how unreliable he is. But I guess that just plays into the story. But it's a great scene, great bit of action. And in the movie, this is where we lose one of our first fairly big minor characters in Hedwig as well.
I thought you were going to talk about Mad-Eye as well then, but yes.
Oh,
Hedwig.
yeah, Mad-Eye. But again, Mad-Eye dies off camera, and I'm really gutted about that.
I can describe to you how he dies if you'd like to know.
Yeah. So, in the book...
Yeah, thank you. Voldemort comes down, he's flying as he does, he goes straight up to Mad-Eye. Voldemort naturally thinks that Harry would be under the best protected person, Mad-Eye. Yeah. Mundungus, who's as Harry at this point, turns his head, sees Voldemort, disapparates, Avada Kedavra, straight into the face of Mad-Eye Moody, R.I.P.
God damn.
Off his broomstick as well.
That should have been
savage.
In the film.
That would have been absolutely horrific to have seen. But Mundungus, there's a lot of history because he is in the earlier books, and he has a massive build-up, so I think it's, again, one of them that if they'd have known his importance towards the end, they would have probably cast him for these films. But that's just the nature of the industry. You can't risk knowing what's going to happen 2 books down the line and make that choice. But I love the Potter battle, just going off a beat, and Hedwig, it's quite a sad death. I mean...
It's not lingered on very much, though, is it? It kind of happens, and it's like, oh, but then we move on. But I guess that's how you'd be in that situation. Like, you have to think about the task at hand. Like, you got to get to safety, you got to get to the safe house, you got to move on.
Yeah, and if I can say the horrific line once more, the way that Hedwig goes on paper is very different. He's in his cage the whole time. He's not set free or anything. And they're just driving on the little motorbike, and they whack the Avada Kedavra spell, and it just takes out Hedwig, who's like sitting dead in a cage next to Harry for a few minutes. And then as Harry falls off the side of the cart, he Allahu Akbars that side of the cage, so really Hedwig's in about 1,000 different pieces towards the end of the film. I prefer the film aspect, but I like the fact that using Hedwig was the reveal that was the real Harry, rather than a fake one, because on paper Harry says Expelliarmus and they back off and it's there like, hey, it's him, because he always uses that spell.
Yeah,
I prefer the film version. Again, it's one of the few times that the films do it better, but it's quite a brutal death, but that's just the nature of the films at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And really it was in this scene where I could tell that we were coming up to the end of this thing. Like the whole thing that Hagrid comes back on the flying bike, which was one of the opening scenes. I think it actually was the opening scene of the original Harry Potter. And he even says, like, I brought you here as a baby when you were no bigger than a bowtruckle. Thanks to Fantastic Beasts, we now know what a bowtruckle looks like. And it was nice. It was nice to see the flying bike back again, and a little bit more of Hagrid as well, who really in the last couple of films hasn't had all that much to do. And from this point on, to be honest, they may as well have cut him out the rest of the movies altogether, really, because he doesn't have much else to do in Deathly Hallows Part 2 at all. But it's a nice scene where Hagrid gets to step up. I like bringing the two together, and it is a nice bookend to their opening scene from the first one. And then we get to the safe house itself, and I guess Domhnall Gleeson, son of Brendan Gleeson, it makes sense that he's the one who announces that Mad Eye's dead. And I think that's where I would have liked to have seen more of the Order stuff, because we get a great sense of it there where Lupin touches down, he doesn't know who to trust, there's all that turmoil in the group of them. I think if we'd have seen more Lupin, maybe not in this one, but definitely in Deathly Hallows Part 2, I think that would have elevated the whole Order side of things. Because a lot of these characters I really don't know much about, and the whole thing about Tonks being pregnant, she goes to announce it in this one, I think, and I think they cut that scene out, didn't you say, before we hit record?
Yeah, she's talking to Molly and they cut it, which doesn't make much sense because it's really important. And it makes sense heading into an aspect of Part 2. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we move on to the breaking into the Ministry now. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I said there isn't much humour in this movie. I think there's plenty for the movie that it is. And this is probably some of the most funniest stuff. I haven't got a list of the 3 actors they disguise as, but these actors are fantastic now. These actors, I'm guessing, would have either spoken the lines and then they dubbed over it, or they would have just dubbed it on set, I'm not sure. Bit of Braveheart trivia as well. I know there's a lot of actors in this film that were in Braveheart, and you gave me the full list, but the guy who plays the one that Harry disguised himself as in the kind of long black Nazi leather coat, he played the Mad Irishman in Braveheart. I think it's Stephen. So if anyone's watched Braveheart, that blew my mind when I found that out. That was like the moment where I found out that Joffrey was the little kid in Batman Begins. But the 3 actors they pick are fantastic, and they do kind of look like Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And it does lead to some funny hilarity in the Ministry itself. We get to go back to that beautiful set they made for Order of the Phoenix, and we see a little bit more of it, how they get into the actual Ministry through the toilets, a lot of other rooms, and then there's an elevator which really reminds me of the Great Glass Elevator from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And we also get a cameo again from a despicable character from Order of the Phoenix in Umbridge.
She's back.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know how she's back, because the last time we see her, she gets carried off into the forest by a herd of centaur, but she's back and she's fine, apparently.
She's recovered. She's got her new role as an Under Secretary to the Ministry of Magic, I presume.
Yeah.
This time she's even more evil because she's wearing the locket of Salazar Slytherin, which they find out from a backstory from Creature about the locket in the first place. I really love the Ministry scenes, if I'm going to go off in general, because it's something very different. It feels like a sort of Mission Impossible aspect that we haven't seen in the Harry Potter films before. I know that there's always this beat of something happening, but it's literally infiltrating the most guarded thing. It's almost like Guardians of the Galaxy / Rogue One type thing. And I really enjoy what they do with it. There's the great sort of comedy aspects that Ron's got, where he sees his dad in the lift and he can't talk to him.
The fact that apparently he's got a wife who's about to be interrogated on the ground floor.
Yeah, and it's just a really sort of great moment. I absolutely love what they did with it, and I love the kind of the Death Eater aspect that we see the Ministry for the first time under Voldemort's control. The nice golden statue's gone, and now it's just Muggles and Mudbloods lifting the wizard up on the stone. It doesn't get any more Aryan race than that. Yeah,
I was going to bring that up actually. If we're talking about like set design and stuff, I love that statue, how they made that, and there's that really nice moment where disguised Hermione looks at it and says like Muggles are meant to be in their proper place, holding up the wizarding world, and because her parents are Muggles, and especially because we get that opening scene with the whole Obliviate thing, it does give more weight to that moment, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it's across the whole films, because she's always been, when Mudblood's introduced in Chamber of Secrets, it's aimed at her, and she's the one that works it out straight away, and she's the one that deals with it better than the other two, you could say, actually, because she's used to it at this point.
Yeah. And also, that's what we talk about. Like, there's a lot of comedy in this scene, but there's still a lot of drama and emotion as well. There's also the scene that comes to mind where disguised Harry goes into Umbridge's office and he finds all the case files of the people that have died. I think we get one of Sirius. I can't remember the other ones. And then I think he lands on Dumbledore at the end. And I think it plays like a variant on the main Harry Potter theme, and he starts crying. It's a beautiful bit of acting from the guy. I feel bad for not knowing his name.
David O'Hara.
David O'Hara, that's it. It's a great bit of acting from him, and it's just a nice moment. Again, it ties back into the previous one. We all know that Dumbledore's gone, but it's nice to see that that death is still having an impact on the character of Harry as he goes on throughout this film.
Yeah, and the whole Dumbledore subplot of the Rita Skeeter book, we kind of get glimpses upon it in the film.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice little nod back to her character from Goblet of Fire.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of cool she's back to some degree, but I like what they're doing, that he isn't that good guy and Harry's a bit confused by it all. But with the Ministry stuff, it was just fascinating to have seen that under the Polyjuice Potion rather than Harry himself. And I don't know this in the film because I can't remember. Is Mad-Eye Moody's eye on the wall of Umbridge's office?
Oh, is that his eye?
Yeah, see, I'm trying to remember if it's in the film because Umbridge has it on the wall, watching over all the employees and stuff.
Yeah, no, there is an eye, but I didn't realise that was Mad Eyes. I thought it was just another random magic eye, but the fact that that's Mad Eyes is really dark.
Yeah, and he kind of takes it and buries it in the forest. So he gives him his proper burial because they could never find his body, which is brutal in all honesty.
Yeah.
But again, it just adds to the evil that is this sort of Nazi-occupied Wizarding world.
And I'd say after this moment, after they get out of the Ministry, this is the part where it's where the camping and the whole woodland trek kicks in. This is where it becomes more like I think I called it an indie movie, didn't I? I don't know if I called it that at the start on the recording in terms of direction style, but it becomes a very, very different movie, and you really get the sense that these three characters are on their own now. Ron gets all his arm cut up from the teleportation with the port key or whatever it is. And this is where we see the three really bonding together. Now, they did to get into the Ministry, but as we said, that's got a lot of comedy involved. It's played for laughs a lot of the time. This is where the shit hits the fan, ultimately, for want of a better word. And this is where most of the interesting stuff for me comes into the movie. Sort of going to be jumping all around the place on this because I can't remember exact chronology of all the things that happen, but this is where we start to see the effects of the locket. Now, I'm going to compare this to Lord of the Rings. I could have done a Lord of the Rings comparison earlier where Ron gets the Deluminator, and I can't remember the speech that Bill Nighy says, but it really reminds me of the one that Galadriel gives to Frodo, the little glass vial. It's like, may it be a light for you in dark places when all other lights go out. It really reminds me of that scene of Lord of the Rings. And another one is sort of like the whole concept of the locket itself. It really reminds me of the One Ring from the Lord of the Rings films, how when it's in the vicinity of anyone or when it's worn by someone, it starts to corrupt them and change them into a different person, makes them a lot more irritable, angry, evil, manipulative. All that stuff really reminds me of Lord of the Rings, so I definitely think that J.K. Rowling had some inspiration from that story, at least in terms of this Horcrux in particular. But even that aside, it does lead to some really great character dynamic between the three, especially with Ron, who gets jealous all of a sudden, and I think it's hinted at in the movie. Well, actually, it is from the vision he gets when he's about to destroy the locket. He thinks that Harry and Hermione have got a thing going on. Now, if you've watched the films before, I guess you can kind of say that they have. I would say it's definitely still been more Ron and Hermione throughout the films, especially when you watch Half-Blood Prince. But throughout the scenes we see in this film, jump in later on with the dance scene, which is one of my favourite scenes out of the entire 8 Harry Potter films, it does show that closeness towards Harry and Hermione in this. Now, whether that's a romantic one, that's up for debate. I don't think it is. I think it's just a very, very close friendship, and it's like a nice gesture that Harry does to try and make her feel a little bit more upbeat and keep morale together. There's the scene where they go to Godric's Hollow together, but I never saw it as a romantic side to it. And I know we're not meant to, because we're meant to see that just how off Ron's vision is, but I thought they explored some neat areas there.
Yeah, and it links back to when we did Half-Blood, where it's more adult, and there's a reason they've got to introduce these relationships, because it does come into play and it does become a really important part of the next few films. Few being the next two, sorry. But I love the Ron stuff, because Ron has always been the sort of happier of the three, jumping about, having fun, having a laugh. he's always been the kind of comic relief for the trio. Whereas the first time, I mean, he's got bags under his eyes. He's been possessed as shit. I mean, the whole point of the locket is there's a piece of Voldemort inside it, which is why it kind of makes them as mental as they do. Each Horcrux has a different sort of possession of Voldemort in them, you could say.
Yeah.
Obviously, the whole diary, the diary was its own thing. Technically, Harry's got Voldemort in him with Parcel Tongue, etc. This has got one. We don't really see enough time with the Ravenclaw stuff. Hufflepuff Cup, we don't have enough time with either, but each locket's sort of destined for its own Voldemort device. And you're right, this is the Lord of the Rings one. The comparisons are there because it's so similar. And it's when Ron just gets up and goes for the first time. And this is where the sort of length of it comes into play, because if he would have come back 5 minutes later, there would have been no impact at all. The fact we get probably about 20 to 30 minutes without Ron says a lot, and if you did that in one part, it just wouldn't work to the level it does, and it has to be an impact that he goes, which does lead to the dance, because that is Harry comforting Hermione for the first ever time. Before that, it's always been sort of Hermione looking after Harry, sort of saving him, whereas this time it's the opposite of that. He's there for her for the first ever time, and it's the great scene, the dance. I know I've kind of jumped on the wagon there, but it all does come from Ron leaving.
Yeah, no, definitely, and if we talk about the song now, I believe that it's called "Oh Children" by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Yeah. I remember being in the cinema for this scene, and I was like really invested in the moment, and I thought it was a beautiful scene. It was a very different scene to what we'd seen in Harry Potter before, and I think you may have told me about this before behind the scenes, but it was either the director or the script writer that wanted to push for that scene to be in there, and didn't they ask J.K. Rowling whether it would be appropriate or something? So
Steve Kloves, the screenplay, he came up with the idea of the scene, and he sort of starts speaking to J.K. Rowling, and she said in interviews that it's become one of her favourite scenes of the whole sort of series, and it's kind of a bit ironic that she didn't write it, because it's not in the book, that dance scene.
Yeah, and I remember being in the cinema for it, and people were laughing at it, and like facepalming, going like, "Oh, this is so stupid, why is this in the movie?" And I was like, I hate to be like this guy, but like, do you understand what's happening? I think they just saw as like, oh, Harry's doing stupid dance scenes, and they were taking it at face value. It's almost like a pivotal scene. Like, I can't imagine this film without it, because throughout the film, you've gone through a lot of darkness, you've gone through a lot of character turmoil, and you're almost in that moment with Harry and Hermione. Like, you need that lift, you need that emotional release, you need that little bit of comedy almost. And he's trying to get morale back, he's trying to comfort her. I don't know if she's the one. No, she is wearing the locket in that moment, I think, and he takes it off her and sets it aside while they dance. I would argue, why don't they just leave it at the side of them all the time? Does it have like a mind of its own? Will it try to escape like the One Ring does sometimes? I'm not sure. But it is a beautiful scene, and it is funny, it is heartbreaking, and when the song ends, that's when the tone does come back down again, when they realise that we can't truly be happy right now because this is a real thing we're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's just this moment between the two where they're kind of accepting, they're trying to have a normal, not life, but they're trying to have a normal moment. The fact that it's Muggle radio, you could say. They tune out of the Wizarding World for the first time in like 7 films as well. It's the first bit of music that's not a choir or a sort of soundtrack piece.
Yeah.
And that does sort of relate to them two being brought up by Muggles, so they kind of know this sort of angle. And I think it's a really powerful scene in itself. When I was younger, it was funny the first time I saw it. It wasn't laugh out loud funny, but it's like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that. And then it kind of grew on me as I saw the film a bit more. And today, it makes so much sense, and it's a really powerful scene between the two of them, because it just shows their friendship. I mean, it would have been too easy for them to have had them kiss or something and change all the sort of Ron stuff to come out as being true, but no, it just shows like how they are as two really good friends.
Yeah, and we're going to be all over the place here, because I know we still need to talk about Xenophilius Lovegood as well, and I think that stuff comes before this one, but...
It's after.
Oh, is it after? Okay, that's fine. I did want to talk about the Godric Hollow stuff as well, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record on this, but also one of my favourite scenes in all 8 Harry Potter movies. They go there, and as a casual fan of these films who hasn't read the last couple of books, this was another element that did really confuse me when I watched it. The whole thing where they go there and Bathilda Bagshot's there, and it turns out that it's Nagini in disguise, and they fight it, and then Nagini goes away, and they don't really talk about that scene anymore. that felt like something that was more fleshed out in the book and was a little bit random in the film. But the moment before that, where they go to the graveyard and they're looking for evidence on the Deathly Hallows, I think Hermione wipes one of the gravestones, finds the symbol. She's about to signal Harry over, and he's just standing at the grave of his parents. And the music in this scene, and if I watch this scene, it always gets me in the Christmassy mood, because you've got the carol singers coming from within the church, and it adds this really nice ambience to it. The whole village itself, I think they're in Hogsmeade at the time. Isn't Godric's Hollow in Hogsmeade?
No, Godric's Hollow. The set is in Hogsmeade, which is a bit of trivia.
Yeah, because it looks very similar to it. That's why it kind of threw me off a little bit.
It's actually not a fictional town as such, but it was a sort of, not wizarding town, but one of those where there are wizarding families. And when you mentioned the books fleshed out more, this ties into the whole Dumbledore subplot. That Dumbledore and his family grew up at Godric's Hollow. Bathilda Bagshot, her nephew, is Gellert Grindelwald. All that stuff ties into it. We'll obviously get that further explored. And then you find out that Dumbledore obviously had Harry's family go there as safekeeping because it was his original family home.
Right.
A lot more happens there, which, again, I don't think they could have put on the screen because it maybe adds too many minutes to do the whole of the Dumbledore subplot, because A, we're going to get that now, but B, across them two films we've added 20 minutes, which I think they get away without doing just okay. But the whole the Godric's Hollow stuff is a lot of history there. It was Godric Gryffindor's home ground, as it's got its name from, and it's gone from being a terrace house in the first film to now a cottage, but that's because it did get explored in the book properly and become a proper location.
Yeah, but it's just in that scene with and I think that Daniel Radcliffe plays that scene beautifully. Like, he doesn't full on cry, but he he wipes his nose and says like "Merry Christmas, Hermione." It's a very, very believable scene. Really nice emotional resident. I think all the scenes with Harry involving his parents, even going back to Philosopher's Stone with the whole Mirror of Erised, there's some of the nicest scenes in the whole film, and we'll get onto the tearjerker moment in Deathly Hallows Part 2 in our next review involving the parents as well. But love that scene as well. Now I want to talk about Ron destroying the locket. Does that come before the Lovegood stuff?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about that. This was a scene that I loved when I saw it in the cinema, and I would probably say it's one of my favourite Harry Potter moments. I'd completely forgotten about it. I rewatched the movie, and then it just reinforced of how awesome this scene is. So he's about to destroy it. There's a whole scene that I did want to get into, like, and nitpick this scene, how Harry dives under the water, an icy cold lake, and apparently doesn't die of like hypothermia or anything. Like, he just stands around like freezing cold. This looks so cold. This scene makes me cold just to look at it. But they get the locket out anyway. Ron's about to destroy it, and the Horcrux is almost fighting back, like it doesn't want to be destroyed. It's trying to get into the head of the person that's about to destroy it, and it's the voice of Voldemort trying to convince Ron that Harry and Hermione think he's worthless, how they're like a power couple. And I remember seeing this in the film, and it really shocked me that I was seeing this in a Harry Potter film. It's all done through CGI, but we get scenes of like Harry and Hermione having sex, and it's really weird and jarring, and it's really nightmarish how they do it. But again, it works for this movie, and it puts you in the shoes of Ron, where he's seeing this happen, two of his close friends getting it on ultimately with his girlfriend. And I love this scene so much because it just speaks so much to Ron's character and ultimately his redemption from this movie where he'd been corrupted by it, and this is where he fights back. I would definitely say that this movie is almost like Ron and Hermione's movie more than Harry's. It's equal.
I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, I love the Horcrux stuff with Ron, and again we'll go into it more in the next one. But the Doe stuff's very interesting in itself.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that Ron does man up, because if you look at the other films, he's never really been this strength. Like I said, he is the comic relief, but for this time, he's man enough to get the sword and destroy the Horcrux. And I'm glad it was Ron that did it, because it should have been him. It affected him the most, and it plays off into the 7 Horcruxes destroyed by 7 different people, which I love.
Yeah, definitely, and I love that. And again, it's one of those scenes that isn't brought up much, but I think it's a fantastically directed scene, fantastically shot, and the visuals in that scene are great, the stuff they do with it. Let's get on to Lovegood then. So our new character introduced plays by Rhys Ifans, I believe.
Yeah, Eyeball Paul.
Oh, go on, sorry.
Eyeball Paul.
Eyeball Paul, who's a character I'm not familiar with, but if you want to go into the history of Eyeball Paul.
Rhys Ifans, 15 years ago played a magical character in a famous British film called Kevin and Perry Go Large, the story of two teenagers making it in Ibiza. Eyeball Paul is the DJ, and he gets the name Eyeball Paul because when he gets pissed, he decides to put vodka into his eyes to give him that kick.
Oh, I do remember that scene now.
Yes, Eyeball Paul. He will never ever be anything else. I remember at the cinema, just his long hair in the wedding scene. I just shouted, "No, it's Eyeball Paul," and so did my whole family. I did the same thing in Amazing Spider-Man 2. He's not the lizard, he's Eyeball Paul.
Oh shit, yeah, he did play the lizard. I keep forgetting that. Yeah, God, this guy's been everywhere. He's been in Enduring Love as well with Daniel Craig. We did that book at school. Yeah, so we get introduced to him, and again, another great character. I love how he plays it. He's a very nervous character, and we later understand why. But again, a broken record. This leads to one of my favourite scenes out of all Harry Potter, and not giving away your entire top 10 list, but today we uploaded the top 10 greatest Harry Potter moments, which was you and Grace on that, and this moment got featured in the top 10. It's the CGI animated sequence of the story of the three brothers involving the Deathly Hallows. I was just fascinated in that scene in the cinema. I thought it was a great bit of world building. Emma Watson does a really, really beautiful voiceover throughout it all, and we hadn't really seen those kind of visuals in Harry Potter before, in terms of where the whole film not comes to a standstill, but where it goes into another story. It's a story in the history of the Harry Potter universe, or the Wizarding World universe. I'm just looking at the people that did the special effects for it. So a company called Framestore produced many of the creature CGI in it, and also did that sequence as well. Was directed by Ben Hibben, who is a name I'm not familiar with. He's done a few other films, mostly video game stuff. But I love it. I love the designs of it, the atmosphere it creates, and the history it creates. It throws back to the whole invisibility cloak thing, which is going back to film 1 and also comes back in the next one. I would argue, I'm probably going to argue this more in our next review, but the whole thing of the Deathly Hallows coming together, I don't think is effectively done in the actual story. There's never a moment where all three are joined at one moment. But it's a really nice sequence. It's something different we haven't seen before, and it's nice. It's a nice breather in the movie to just kind of sit back and enjoy a bit of Harry Potter storytelling.
Yeah, and like I said, it adds lore to the Harry Potter world, and that's such a big thing to it, because we get sort of glimpses in the Chamber of Secrets. We get the sort of the background story to the four founders, and in this we get although it's a fairy tale, it is true at the end of the day, but it just adds this extra dynamic. The whole the tales of Beedle the Bard, or is that the Hobbit? No, that's something else.
No, Beedle the Bard.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah. There's a character called Bard in the Hobbit.
Oh,
Let's get them mixed up. It's just one of those where I absolutely love it, and the Deathly Hallows itself has become almost as recognisable as the four Harry Potter houses, you could argue, post the release of the Deathly Hallows. Obviously, it's the name of the film too, but it's a brilliant story, and I know you mentioned it isn't tied together, but we will talk about that in the next film, because that's something that I have a massive issue with, which I'll elaborate on another time. Mm-hmm. But I like what they do, and I just love the whole concept of the Elder Wand, and suddenly the pieces start clicking from them stealing Ollivander and the Half-Blood Prince, all the way up to Harry and Voldemort's wand sort of not working against each other in the Goblet of Fire. It all links up to the revelation of the Elder Wand.
Yeah, definitely, and it's a really nice sequence, leads to a Death Eater attack, and the introduction of one of my favourite characters, is a very, very minor character, and I actually can't find the actor now. He plays the leader of a pack of guys called the Snatchers, who are sent by the Death Eaters to bring in Harry, Ron and Hermione to Malfoy Manor. And I don't even know how to go about describing this guy. He's sort of like a punk rocker.
He's like Russell Brand, but not as much of a twat.
Yeah, yeah, he is. And it's like a punk rocker that's just wandered onto the Harry Potter set one day, and they just said, like, do you want to be in the movie? But he's great, and I love how he plays it, and he's even in the second part as well. He gets quite a big moment in that movie. I just love his personality, how he plays it, and how they're almost like bounty hunters in this movie from like Star Wars. Like, they bring them to the manor, and he's like, right, where's my money? I just want to get paid for this. Like, I'm not into this like whole, he's the chosen one, he's going to be a Horcrux. Like, he just wants to get paid, go about his life, make a living for himself. I don't know. I just thought I'd bring him up in the review. He's a really cool character. I like their whole troop of people. I think you've got is it Greyback? Is it the werewolf guy? He's with them too.
Yeah, so he's called Scabia, the Snatcher that you like, and he's part of Greyback's crew. I don't really like the fact that Greyback's leading the Snatchers. He's destined for better than, if you headed the werewolves, you shouldn't be a Snatcher in the background. You should be doing your own thing. But I love him because he's not in the books. He's this kind of original character. And
oh, he's not in the books?
No, there's just this brilliant wit about him that he's just kind of looming, the sort of, not mediocre villain, but he's like the Bob to the Joker in the original Batman.
Yes.
He's like that kind of henchman's henchman, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And he's just got a few lines, and the way he does it's just quite cool. And the Snatcher fight itself, there's just no soundtrack. They're in the woods, and it's this really cool dynamic, which does lead into Malfoy's manor.
Yeah, let's talk about that now. And there's one actress in particular we need to talk about in this scene, and that is Helena Bonham Carter. We have sung her praises in all the other movies that she's been in. This is my favourite movie with her in, and it's the scene we were talking about before we hit record, which I think you said they had to cut down because it was pushing close to a 15 certificate. It's the scene where she's torturing Hermione Granger. I remember being in the cinema, that was happening, and I think it cuts away. I think it goes to like where Harry is with all the others in the dungeons, and you just hear her screaming. And I remembered being there like, I can't believe Harry Potter has gone this far. This has gone insanely dark. Like, I know the whole film had been dark up until that point. It was the moment where Bellatrix Strange is carving mudblood into Hermione Granger's hand, where I was like, okay, this is really pushing the boundaries here for what Harry Potter can do. But again, it's justified. It's a moment where that is something Bellatrix Strange would do. She's killed Sirius. We've seen how deranged she was after Dumbledore had died in Half-Blood Prince. It's only logical that she would be this brutal in her actions. We know what she's done before. We were aware of her history, and this is just sort of like a little glimpse into what she's done in the past and what she's capable of doing.
Yeah, I mean, we hear how she cruciated the Longbottom parents into insanity, and seeing how she was torturing Hermione. You sort of see cutting to Ron in the dungeon, going a bit mental at the exact same time. He's fuming. Obviously, he loves Hermione at this point. But it's a brutal scene because they're not showing some of it. You're just hearing the screams. One thing I want to talk about, though, is Peter Pettigrew.
Yes. A little bit of dialogue in this one, I think. Or a sound effect, at least.
Wormtail opened the door and Dobby kind of just stupefies him, you could say. Some house elf magic. I utterly despise that scene, and there's a good reason why I'm going to say my favourite catchphrase one more time in the books. Because Wormtail walks in and sees them all escaping and doing good things, and Harry kind of says, I saved your life once, you kind of owe me the favour. That sounds weird, but Wormtail hesitates and lets them get away with it.
Oh,
and what happens
I'm trying to think when he saved his life.
He let by.
Oh, is it when he
stopped
Sirius from
killing him?
Oh, okay.
And there's this whole wizarding law that there's like a life debt that Dumbledore speaks of in the third book, which isn't in the film. But what happens is obviously Wormtail saves him at this point, and the silver hand that Voldemort gave to him, kills Wormtail. It starts choking him to death, and Ron and Harry are trying to get the hand off him, but
because he's betrayed him.
Yeah, and that is.
Oh, that would have been fantastic.
I get that could have been dark for a 12A, but that's why I hate the whole fact that he just kind of gets clicked and he's done, whereas there's a really nasty end to the whole Marauder quadrilogy, you could argue.
Yeah. I was going to say that's the last time we see Timothy Spall, isn't it? He's not in Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Exactly, so, it's a bit of a shame about that because...
that would have been great.
I'm really annoyed
cool
now.
Scene. I really want to read this book.
it's a really cool scene in the books, but... Again, it's something that adds a lot more layers to the sort of the Harry Potter lore. But with the whole Malfoy Manor scene, another thing we miss is that Draco, he defends Harry. He doesn't want to give him up. It's just the whole repeat of the point that Draco's not a bad person on the inside.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess we can talk about more Draco in the next one as well, but this is where we really get to see that stuff. Actually, I would say that it started in Half-Blood Prince a little bit with it. But it's a nice scene, and when you consider how much of a dick Draco was in the first couple of movies, it's nice to see him progress this far. And I think that the the events of Half-Blood Prince have really weathered him. You can see that in Tom Felton's performance in this one, and it's a nice gesture that he does to Harry Potter. And just from a glance, you can tell that he knows it's Harry Potter. He knows that it's him, but he's not going to give him away. And it's a really, really nice moment between the two of them. Really short moment. And that ultimately culminates into a big... It's not even a big action climax, is it? It's more of a character-driven one. It's sort of like Half-Blood Prince again, where we said that there wasn't really any moment in that film that was huge spectacle apart from the flaming wheel, maybe, with the... What was it? The Inferi were they called, did you say?
Yeah.
You really had that, and then at the end it was character drama, and it's exactly the same in this one where Dobby shows up. We need to talk about Dobby as well. Okay, so I think we were both in agreement, and I think most people we talked to, that we hate Dobby in Chamber of Secrets. He is a really irritating character when he's like hitting himself, he's saying bad Dobbies, keep trying to just get in Harry Potter's way the whole time. I loved him in this movie. When I went to see Deathly Hallows Part 1, I already knew the twist that was going to happen at the end. I already knew the big reveal that he was going to get killed, because all my lovely fellow students at school spoiled that for me before I saw the movie. And it's heartbreaking. It's really, really dragged out. Not dragged out in like this is taking too long way. They really linger on the sacrifice that Dobby makes to save Harry Potter and his friends. And the scene on the beach at the end, like every time I watch it, I hate this character in Chamber of Secrets. He hasn't been in any of the Harry Potter movies before then. He shows up in Deathly Hallows Part 1, and it's one of the biggest tearjerkers of the movie, at least for me.
Dobby's death, I'm not going to say I love it, but I love Bellatrix.
Yeah.
And she is so fucking badass that she can throw a knife at someone while they're disapparating and get the kill.
Yeah.
And it's the whole, like, don't talk to me. And I love that Dobby is a free elf. I don't know what his quote is, but he stands up to the Malfoy family, who obviously he served for years and years. And, you know, Dobby has come to save Harry Potter, and he gets absolutely wrecked. And I think what makes it sadder is the fact they just wake up on the beach and he's just breathing heavily.
Yeah.
And it is this sort of tearjerker moment. I mean, I never cried. I didn't laugh, though. I wasn't that much of a savage when I was younger because I knew what was going to come. But it's quite hard to watch it because for the first time with Harry, he's genuinely devastated at a character's death. I mean, he has been before, but we never really see the immediate aftermath. With Sirius, he just goes straight into a duel. With Dumbledore, he just goes running after Snape. But with this, the film finishes with Dobby's death. Yeah. And it's quite sad because he's sort of running over to Hermione, and for the first time Hermione can't help him because she can't, and it's sort of accepting that he's going to die, and it's just his final words are just like Harry Potter. And then it's just when his eyes close and it looks like it cuts from CGI to sort of a model. It's
like a puppet, yeah.
And I think that just makes it sadder. It's kind of like if Yoda would have like been stabbed with a knife and been the original, you know, when he just disappears in puppet form. I could imagine something else like that, but the fact Dobby just lingers on them does make it sadder, and it does make for one of the saddest endings of one of the films.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so real. You were talking about the heavy breathing when when Harry Potter's cradled him and he's got that really like raggedy breath. It's a believable moment. It does feel like it's really happening in front of you, even though it's like a magical fantasy house elf who you hated a couple of movies ago. It's a heartbreaking moment, and the whole thing with Hermione not being able to help. I do question this, by the way. This is something that seems really irregular in the Harry Potter universe. So with like the whole Sectum's Emperor thing with Snape, he uses the magical spell that cures Draco. Earlier in the movie, we see that Hermione's got that magic juice that she like sprinkles on you, and it'll just like heal your wrecked arm. I was like, didn't she have any more of that she could just like dribble onto like Dobby's wounds and just heal him? You know, like Fawkes the Phoenix has healing tears. Why didn't they just bottle loads of those up and just go on their quest?
Well,
I guess Fawkes flies away, doesn't he, at the end of Half-Blood Prince?
I actually don't know about Fawkes, but what I was going to say about the disapparating thing, it's called splinting. If you disapparate this properly, you have to put the right sort of ingredients on you, whereas a mortal knife wound, it's very much a muggle death. Which they don't really cover, but Hermione can't save him in this time. I think that's what it is when Harry keeps looking up to her and she knows she can't do anything about it. And I think that does make her sadder because she genuinely can't.
Yeah, and I mean the last line of Dobby where he's like, Dobby is was it Dobby is happy to be with his friends, Dobby is happy to be with his friend Harry Potter or something like that, and then he just dies. And what you were talking about earlier with the whole song, how it was Muggle radio and they were distancing themselves from magic, Harry Potter outright says it in this scene. He's like, I want to bury him, no magic, like we'll do it ourselves. And the music, I guess if we talk about that now, so Alexandra Desplat does the soundtrack. The music that plays for Dobby's funeral is heartbreak. It's probably one of my favourite songs in the soundtrack. This is what I mean, they really, really linger on this character's death. And the music in the last two Harry Potter films, I would say, are the standout ones, probably since Williams. I know we talked about, what was his name, Hooper?
Yeah.
Who did the music to Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince. I didn't really care for the music in Half-Blood Prince. I didn't think it was that noticeable. Loved the music in Order of the Phoenix. And I think in terms of sound, Hooper's was closer to the sort of sound that John Williams would create. However, I think the most memorable music comes from the final two, and it really is an emotional score, which is exactly what you need considering it is the last two movies.
Yeah, and it's a shame Nicholas Hooper, because I really love his work on 5 and 6. I believe they're stronger soundtracks than the two Desplats. However, I believe Desplat has the more powerful songs.
Yeah. Like, if I'm looking at memorable moments in the last two, I also remember the soundtrack to them as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think it's one of them where I love what they do with Dobby's death in it. It's very, not underwhelming, it's completely the wrong word. It just suits what they're going for and distancing themselves away from the sort of the Harry Potter world. It's very, not normal, but it's so non-wizarding, the soundtrack, if that's the real phrase, that it kind of does counter into it.
Yeah, no, I completely get that as well. I'm looking forward to talking about the soundtrack in Deathly Hallows Part 2 as well, because that's probably my favourite since John Williams. Really, all we've got marked down on our plan is favourite scenes, but I think we've pretty much talked about all of my favourite ones at least. We did forget to mention the whole wedding, Fleur and Bill, is it? Yeah, we did forget to mention that moment where the Death Eaters attack and Lupin kind of steps up and tells them to go. It's a very short scene. I think there's a little bit more of a setup as well with Ginny and Harry, but we discussed in our last review that we really never bought into that whole romance thing anyway. So I guess we're going to recommendation then. So for me, it feels awkward recommending a Harry Potter movie because chances are people have already seen them anyway, but this is definitely one of my favourites in the series, especially watching it a couple of weeks ago. I think it's really strong. I would say out of all of them, this is probably the most interesting in terms of character and taking the three characters, pushing them to their emotional limits and taking them in directions that no other entries in the series have done, especially with Ron and his whole redemption story and how he gets corrupted through the films. It's really interesting stuff. It's a nice bonding movie as well between the three. Although the three have been together sort of on an adventure, this is really them just taking time out for themselves for most of the film. And I can agree, I can acknowledge when people would say that it's definitely a slower paced one compared to the other ones. I understand that, but to me the pacing of this movie fits the film and fits the tone of it. I'm not really bothered that we don't see much of Hogwarts and that we don't see any of Hogwarts in this one or many of the other kids, because we get that in part 2. I just think it's a really strong movie, and it may, I don't think it is my favorite. I probably would say that Deathly Hallows Part 2 is slightly better than this movie, edges it out a little bit, but you really have to look at this one and the next one as one big movie. And I think as the first part, there's the intro to that, it sets up the characters well, it sets up what they ultimately need to do very well, and it goes in some really interesting directions. And as we said in the review, this film contains a lot of my overall favourite scenes out of all the Harry Potter movies, so I would definitely recommend this movie.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the strong ones. Again, I can't really rank them properly, we'll do it at the end of part 2, but this is by no means in the bottom half. That sounds nasty to the ones that will be in the bottom half, but as in terms of character goes, this is the right type of film you need to, although the previous ones have set up for the finale, this sets up the part 2 even more because it's delivering on what happens in 5 and 6 while setting up for part 2. And it's certainly the best in terms of Harry, Ron and Hermione's relationships together.
Yeah, definitely. So all these elements are going to take us into our final review for Harry Potter month, which will be Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. I think we'll be recording that in the next few days, so expect that up around the weekend time or maybe into next week. Alongside that, as we said, today has gone up the top 10 Harry Potter moments, and the final video of Harry Potter month will be a special Battle of the Brackets, getting back into those. We've missed that show. We love doing Battle of the Brackets, and it's going to be on where we're going to be arguing for best Harry Potter character. So there's still a good few Harry Potter videos you can expect out, but as I said, with Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 1 in this review, we are ramping up towards the end of the month. So that'll do it for our review on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of the movie, any of the other Harry Potter movies, or anything to do with Harry Potter in general. Please do drop us a comment. In terms of what's coming up on the channel, other than the things I just said, there'll be more reaction videos from me, which I'll be recording at the weekend, more movie reviews. There'll be one for Allied, which I'm going to see on Saturday, and yeah, all the other ones I just mentioned. So please do hit that subscribe button. It is the best way to keep updated with all of our content, and until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.